Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to so many of you who have stood and spoken today and have expressed your concern, your interest in this. Let me begin by first of all saying that it was not my desire to be the primary author on ACA 5. It was a group thing, and I had hoped that someone else would basically lead the charge, because I was exhausted from last year, from 392. And so I didn't volunteer to chair this. It was a group thing that we met with communities and organizations. And somehow or another, people just assumed that I was the main author. And as a result, my name comes first, even though I'm last in the alphabet with regards to this. So for whatever reason, it was not my intent to do that. When I began my presentation today, I was going to apologize to many of you, because you know my strategy generally is to talk to people, to try to get to you, to get to your office, to actually have a conversation with you. And a significant number of you, I was not able to do that, mainly because we were quarantined and we were here and we were there, and time was running out, and so we have a very limited amount of time. And I had to rely upon others to do some of the conversation for me. The API community the caucus chose to do its own conversation with its members. And so that's why you didn't necessarily hear from me. But your own members chose to do that. And the same is true with the Latino caucus, because there were all these caucuses, and each one had a responsibility to get engaged with their persons and come back to me and tell me where they were. The last I heard was I was supposed to have a meeting organized with you through Mr. Gibson, I believe it was, and some others. And so it was not that I was ignoring you, it's that we had a limited amount of time coming back. And so very few of you I had really a chance to reach out to. And I got the information from others and eventually found out where people were with regards to. So I want to apologize as I was going to, because my strategy has always been to meet with you individually. And so I was then being told who potentially I needed to call, because we were running out of time, and not because I was trying to ignore anyone, but I was getting information from various sources. So I apologize to you for some of you that I did not reach out to. But when you've got to get 54 votes and you have a very limited amount of time, you have to maximize what you're doing. And I had much more time with 392 and 931 combined and all those kinds of things. So let me let you say that this was not my intent to do this. And one of the reasons, other reason, is because it is very difficult to talk about race, especially when you are a person who sees it everywhere. It's very hard not to say, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, because then you become the person who's always so race conscious, and people start avoiding you and disliking you. So I try to save my race conversations for the real big race issues, not the little ones, because if you do the other, people begin to avoid you, and then you become ineffective in your ability to teach them about the big things. And so I try not to because of that, and I try not to also because it's very painful for me. A person who's lived as long as I've lived, I'm 71, I'll be 72 in September, has lived as long as I lived, has seen so much, tried so hard, tried to help people understand how I feel, what I see in my children and in my community, what I see in my relatives, how I see the hurt and the pain that they feel and the discrimination that they're involved with. And some people think, well, you've got it all, Shirley. You know, you've got the career, you've got, a successful life, you've got the big house, you've got all these things. But I still have family members, and I still have neighbors, and I still see children, and I still go in schools where I see that their future is blocked. And I know that but for the grace of God, that would have been me. Because that's what it is in terms of the family and the relatives that you see. And so when I hear people say, yeah, I know it's there, but I want to do this, and I want to do that, and I want to do this, I want to do all those things too. And yes, we must solve our K-12 problem. We must, and that's why it's so important to me that we solve that problem. But I've also learned that in the process of the struggle, that I can't just do K-12, because then there's a generation up here that I'm also losing. And so I've got to help them as well. And I've got to help people get into that. And I've also got to help people get contracts, because I see the vision being killed in the eyes of young people when they can't get these contracts and these jobs. I see the fact that we don't have enough of kids of color now in apprenticeship program. So when I go on work sites, I see almost very few African Americans on work sites. Why? Because they're not letting them into apprenticeship program, because there is no outreach for them to get into that. And so we have construction across the street that people call me from on the Capitol that says there's no African American building that building across the street. And we had to go to the governor, and we have no program to make sure that that happens, that there's diversity on our work site. And so eventually they realized, aha, there's no African Americans, so they went and found 3 of them who are qualified to do ironwork on the building across the street. These are the things that I see, and they're difficult to explain. But I do know that when I worked underneath affirmative action, and I spent those years at the university, I had an opportunity to help people. I know that my professor helped me, that had he not been on that campus at UCLA, I would have never been a Woodrow Wilson Fellow. I would have never gone to graduate school because there were too many other people pulling me away, but he was there as the African American on campus to help us navigate. He couldn't take my test. He couldn't write my dissertation. He couldn't do those things, but he could encourage me to continue to move forward. He could be a role model for me, and he could lift me up when times were difficult as they tried to put me out of school, and yet I had the highest GPA in the department, graduated earlier than anybody else. And yet the racism of the white men in the department wanted to destroy me, and they made every effort to try to do it. And were it not for this gentleman who was a scholar and a role model for me, they would have done that. And so I had a commitment when I began to teach that I had to open these doors for every young person I ever saw, to make sure of that. Not only African American students, but I believe that white students who came into my class are better people right now because of the diversity that was in that classroom. They had friends that didn't look like them, that we could challenge them in their thoughts and they can challenge us. And they grew from simply being in the midst of them. And it made California, it made our university, made California a better place for people to be. So when we start talking about this, it is everything. It is not just getting in a university. It's having support systems while you're there to keep you there. It's committing you to understand that you then have a responsibility to do likewise. That when you have a work site and people come to that work site that are so different, that's why when you walk into my office here or you walk into my office in San Diego, you see extreme diversity in my office. But you know what I also did? I challenged all my colleagues that they had to hire black staff in their offices too. So when you go into the offices around San Diego, everybody has at least one black person working in that office that never did that before. Why? Because that is important. So I ask you today to give Californians a chance. Give us the opportunity to vote on this. This isn't not about you saying that we got to have it, but that generation needs to know it. And the request, interestingly, for this came from the students at Berkeley when I went to do my campus climate experience, and they said, we want to repeal Prop 209. We need to have a diverse student population. We want to have different kind of faculties. We want to have different kinds of activities. We need support services. And the students who were asking for it were not black. They were white students. And so I want to challenge you today as you think about what we're doing. We have a unique opportunity, a unique opportunity. And I was so grateful I didn't have to convince you that racism is real because George Floyd did that. So that was one conversation that I didn't have to have about this issue. We have to admit it is real. And it is there, and it is present, and it impacts not just the lives of African Americans, but everyone in this country. And as a legislature, we have a responsibility to figure out every way that we possibly can to impact that. And it will not be one thing. 209, removing 209 will not solve all of the problems. But it's one of the many tools that we have to have in California to say California is the land of great opportunity. And those who came here, as I did at 3 years old, they came here because they knew they could get better things here than they could in Mississippi and Alabama and other places like that. That the sun was shining brighter in California, and their future would be brighter as well. I respectfully ask for your aye vote for ACA.